afraid of the dark.
Starting a new job is always a blend of excitement and jitters. When I landed a summer job at an original festival in town LA, I was just looking for some redundant cash before my elderly time of council started in the fall. The festival was a typical setup with lifts, games, and food stands, but its main magnet was the funhouse, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that I suppose used to be some old guy's manse or commodity. I was assigned to manage the funhouse, which was a favorite among the festival goers. It sounded simple enough: companion the guests in, ensure they have fun, save time, and observe them leave. At first everything sounded straightforward, but also I started noticing odd effects. It started with small disagreement. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would crop. At first I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of horse slough and riots was no easy task. Still, as the days passed, the figures just did dead add up. 7 went by, 6 came out. 10 went by, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Commodity was out and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy autumn, a golden girl caught my eye as she walked up to the funhouse. She was drop-dead gorgeous and nearly sounded out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been further than a many times aged than me. I authentically had to do a double take. Am not a weird Joe by any means, but I couldn't help but cinch eyes with her for a many seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the magnet. After she faded into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, occasionally asking me questions and thingamabob. Actually, I was paying a little further attention to the guests that night, as I wanted to see that girl as she left and perhaps work up the courage to talk to her. Enough soon I started picking up on the fact that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to crop. Many further twinkles passed and I started getting upset. She should have been out by now. Impelled by a genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for many twinkles and go looking for her. I stepped outside and locked the entrance door. I began probing, navigating the dimly lit apartments and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across commodity I had noticed during my original walkthroughs, a slightly conspicuous confluence in the wall. I'm not really sure what I was awaiting, but curiosity got the stylish of me. I pressed against the confluence and I heard a distinct click. I played around with it some further and my jaw nearly hit the bottom when I realized it was a retired door. It swung open sluggishly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing then? I was surely going to have a long discussion with my master about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I did have important headpiece to spend being nervous because I was still so shocked about the whole situation. I got to the end of the passage and set up another door. I slung it open and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the festival grounds. I breathed a shriek of relief as this discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people I had noticed leaving the magnet had presumably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back the way I had came, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to keep exploring the funhouse rather of returning to my post. I suppose a part of me just wanted a many redundant twinkles of this improvisational break I was taking. I walked through a couple further room beach. That's when I noticed it. On one of the walls was another faint confluence, identical to the first bone I had seen. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could incontinently tell this bone was veritably different. The rotten smell was the first thing I noticed. Further concerning, however, was the fact that there was no corridor in this bone but a graduation. A graduation that led down. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground bottom and I was told specifically that this place did have a basement. I batted climbing down, but I just felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. So against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was awaiting to find a basement, but what I set up rather was far, far worse. I got to the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was in shock. I was literally standing in a lair that extended into the darkness. There was literally no way that this was part of the house over. The rational part of my brain screamed turned back to forget about it, but the riddle was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp and the lair was fully silent. As I explored, my flashlight ray fell on commodity unanticipated. A white glittery bag was sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar. And also it hit me. It was that girl's bag. I was sure of it. I started to horrify. Was she really down then? I misdoubted there was any way a rational person could find this lair and not turn around. But the evidence was literally in my hands. My mind started contending. Was she hurt? Lost? And also a more intimidating study hit me. Was she alone? I did feel safe presently, but I was in too deep, violating every survival instinct I had. I yelled out into the lair for that girl. I awaited. Nothing. I was just about to roar again when I heard the sound of rapid-fire steps echoing through the coverts. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the graduation. I got half over and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The steps were principally right on top of me. Now I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and also a voice chimed out. A girl's voice, her voice. She heaved, "Help me." Clinging her side as if in pain, I yelled at her to climb up, but she claimed that I follow her back into the darkness. For some reason, I told her there was no chance I was doing that and principally forced her up the graduation. We got to the top and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't really give me a straight answer. She kept saying she can't really flash back how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing effects moving in the dark, and that there were voices calling to her. I didn't know how to reuse this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she did flashback. The weirdest thing about her story was that she was looking at me with this blank regard that authentically freaked me out. I principally interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far down from this person as possible. I called the police, but she decided to leave the funhouse before they got there. I no way saw her again. The police delved, and what they set up was actually insane. Supposedly, this house had been some kind of safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s. As similar, it had a bunch of secret galleries that led to a section of the underground Prohibition coverts that had not been discovered. The proprietor claimed he'd no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. I quit my job and got as far down from there as possible. I still have so numerous questions. Did the proprietor know about this? Was that girl nearly abducted? Had someone knocked her out and took her down there, or commodity? Was she part of the whole thing? I feel like there's a number of explanations for what happened to me, but all of them are inversely intimidating. Ever since I was a sprat, I loved carnivals. The lights, the games, the changeable joy of it all. I know lots of people find them weird and jejune, but not me. Growing up in a small city in Indiana, it's not like there was a whole bunch to do so whenever the festivals would roll through city. You stylish believe I was spending as important time there as I conceivably could. It's been over 20 times and I still enjoy the atmosphere of original festival, despite what I'm about to tell you. I suppose my love for festivals is commodity I'll no way lose. I was like 10 or 11 when this happened, and I was a kind of cerebral sprat growing up. In the days leading up to the spring festival, I set up myself in the library reading up on whatever I set up intriguing at the time. For whatever reason, I wound up in the history section. I flashed back the books being literally crusted in layers of dust. That's how long it had been since they were indeed touched. I was flipping through a book on the history of our city when a small, faded slip of paper fell out from between the runners. Confused, I leaned down to pick it up. To my affable surprise, it was a ticket for our original spring festival, dated over 15 times agone. The odds of commodity like that happening had to be extremely low. I was ecstatic. This ticket would make a great addition to my eclectic collection back home. What was indeed cooler, however, was the fact that the date on the ticket was just 2 days away, when the festival would clearly be in city. As I prognosticated, the festival cruised into city the coming morning, so I figured why not use the old ticket just for laughs to see what the cell attendant would say. I wanted to get it punched anyway. The coming evening, I headed to the festival with the ticket safely put away in my fund. As I approached the entrance, the festival seemed just as lively as ever, the air filled with the scent of cotton delicacy and popcorn. I pulled out the ticket at the gate, handing it over to the Joe at the booth. His face changed the moment he saw it. He went pale, his eyes widening slightly before he masked his response with a forced smile. It was actually a little creepy. Enjoy your evening, he stammered, handing me back the ticket without punching it. I was so weirded out by his response that I forgot to ask him to punch it. I signed it off, however, allowing perhaps he was just new and confused about the old design of the ticket. I wandered around, played some games, and enjoyed a channel cake. The night was perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that commodity was off. I felt eyes on me, observing. Perhaps it was just paranoia. I tried to ignore it at first, but I kept noticing the festival workers giving me weird looks. After a while, I got fed up and decided to ask one of the aged game drivers about it. I set up a kind-looking senior man running the ring toss booth. I showed him the ticket, and unlike the Cell Joe, he didn't indeed try to hide his shock. He glanced around nervously, a head leaning near. "Youthful man, where did you get this?" he asked. After telling him where I set up it, I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Maybe I should have just kept the ticket at home. "You set up commodity you weren't meant to find," the old man started, his voice dropping to a tail. "This ticket, it's part of a story that the folks around then don't talk about much. About 15 times agone, commodity terrible happened during the festival right then in the city." He broke as if importing rainfall to continue. "There was a youthful worker, name of Ryan Nieskid. Everybody liked him. He was responsible for one of the rides. I can't flash back which. One night he just disappeared, vanished without a trace. The police set up his portmanteau, but there was nothing in it except a ticket that looked an awful lot like this bone," he said, waving towards my hands. The atmosphere around us sounded to drop a many degrees, he continued. "They searched far and wide, indeed drained the original pond, but no sign of him after that. Strange effects started passing every time the festival stopped here. Accidents, effects going missing, odd sightings. People said it was Ryan trying to come back or commodity worse that took him. I could feel a bite running down my spine, but a part of me was skeptical." "And you believe that?" I asked. The old man sighed. "I've seen enough to keep an open mind. But the point is, the ticket you set up might stir effects up. It's stylish, you get relief of it. Leave it here." He also signaled for me to give it to him, but I was reluctant. I looked down at it, reading it over again as if there was some kind of secret I was missing. How could its ticket be the cause of all that? I questioned, still not completely buying it. The look in his eye got darker. His tone switched, nearly as if he were angry. He told me to give it then, nearly in a scowl. I considered it, but concluded that some stupid story wasn't worth giving up such a cool remembrance. I told him no, and he actually sprung up with a swiftness that startled me. He reached for the ticket, his fritters grazing my hand. I jerked back, artificially, clinging the ticket tighter. The old man's expression morphed into commodity hopeless, nearly predatory. "You don't understand." He whizzed, his eyes zipping around as if expecting something or someone to crop from the murk. I backed down towards the canopy's exit, my heart pounding. "I suppose I should go," I stammered, turning to lose myself. In the crowd behind me, I could hear his calls, a blend of prayer and warning. I didn't watch what he was saying, however. I let the bustling crowd around me drown his voice out. My mind was contending, not indeed about the ticket, but more so his aggressive reaction. The joy of the festival had been putrefied. I left earlier than planned, the ticket burning a hole in my fund. Over the coming many days, my luck sounded to turn sharply. I missed catching the Academy machine, scraped my knee enough bad in a bike accident, and worst of all, my stylish friend indicted me of stealing his favorite baseball card, commodity I would no way do. Things got worse than that, however. I flashed back coming home one night to my mother in gashes after losing her job. My family broke his leg skateboarding the next week, and our cherished family pet, Bean, also passed away many days after that. It was like a dark pall had settled over me since that night at the carnival. I couldn't help but flash back the old man's warning about the ticket stirring effects up. It sounded ridiculous, but also again, so was the string of bad luck that followed me. My dad laughed when I told him about my proposition. He told me that there was no similar thing as ghosts, and that I shouldn't be so superstitious. One stormy autumn after academy, after a particularly tough day where I had forgotten my lunch and had to go empty, I pulled the ticket out. I goggled at it, this small piece of paper that had brought nothing but trouble, feeling a blend of wrathfulness and fear. I decided I had had enough. I seized my Mac and thrills and trudged out to the creek that ran behind our house. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my casket as the rain soaked through my hair. Standing at the creek's edge, I took one last look at the ticket before tearing it into bitsy pieces and watching them get swept up by the current. It's just a piece of paper, I thought. Things started to look up after that. My friend set up his baseball card and apologized to me, and we came musketeers again. I did not miss the machine a single time that academy year. My mama got a better job in the coming couple of days. Whether it was all a coexistence or that ticket really was a curse, I could say. But one thing was for sure. I learned to be more careful about what I picked up and brought home. I don't believe in the supernatural, even after all this stuff happened to me. My parents like telling me that I imagined everything because I was so youthful it's still hard to completely explain it. But I've long since accepted it as one of those weird concurrents that you just can't explain. 3. I hate carnivals. I think they're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased though, and mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, I was dragged to our local carnival by my younger sister. I obviously wasn't going to be rude and not go, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I actually opted not to go with them as I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remember there being in previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a little to try and get my money's worth. After all, I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the funhouse as I figured that would at least be a little cool. I was expecting there to be a ton of people in there, but it was completely empty. There was literally not a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a funhouse alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking is to the atmosphere without it. You're basically just standing there in silence surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged my shoulders and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was like halfway through when I noticed something odd in one of the reflections to my left. There was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing since there were mirrors all over the place. He could have literally been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me, or he had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now, and then I saw him again out of the corner of my eye. He had this deranged smile. This time it was the exact same face. I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost, but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors, and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and a hand reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creepster in his full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and a tired, sunken face. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier. With the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I sprinted out of the funhouse and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket and a horrifying realization hit me. I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me that the funhouse was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it, but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that that guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic. frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that happened to apparently someone had been texting her phone, pretending to be me, and convinced her to drive out to this remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad, even though the guy told her to come alone. They pretty quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how we got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head.